The small town of Willow Creek had always been a quiet, unassuming place. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and nothing extraordinary ever happened. That was until the night the sky turned green. It began with a low hum, like the sound of a distant engine, but deeper, more resonant. The townsfolk stepped out of their homes, peering up at the sky. The stars seemed to shimmer unnaturally, and then, without warning, a streak of light tore across the heavens. It wasn't a shooting star, it was too slow, too deliberate. The light descended into the forest just outside town, and the ground shook with the impact. Among the first to investigate was Elena Martinez, a 28-year-old wildlife biologist who had returned to Willow Creek to care for her ailing father. Elena had always been fascinated by the unknown, and the idea of a meteorite landing so close to home was too tempting to ignore. She grabbed her backpack, filled it with supplies, and set off into the woods. The forest was eerily quiet, as if the animals themselves were holding their breath. Elena followed the trail of broken branches and scorched earth until she reached the crash site. What she found there defied explanation. The object was not a meteorite. It was a sleek, metallic pod, about the size of a small car, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. The air around it crackled with energy, and the ground was scorched in a perfect circle. Elena approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As she drew closer, the pod began to emit a soft, pulsating light. A seam appeared along its surface, and with a hiss of escaping air, the pod began to open. Elena froze, torn between curiosity and fear. What emerged from the pod was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was a girl, or at least, something that resembled a girl. She was tall, nearly 10 feet in height, with long, slender limbs and skin that shimmered like opal. Her eyes were large and luminous, with irises that shifted colors like a kaleidoscope. She wore a form-fitting suit that seemed to be made of the same material as the pod, and her hair, if it could be called that, was a cascade of fine, silvery threads that floated around her head as if suspended in water. The alien girl looked at Elena, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a voice that was both melodic and haunting, the girl spoke. "Do not be afraid," she said. "I mean you no harm." Elena's mind raced. She had spent her life studying the natural world, but this was beyond anything she had ever encountered. She took a deep breath and forced herself to speak. "Who are you?" she asked. "Where do you come from?" The girl tilted her head, as if considering the question. "I am called Lyra," she said. "I come from a world far from here, a place your people have never seen." Elena's curiosity overcame her fear. "Why are you here? What do you want?" Lyra's expression softened. "I am here to learn," she said. "To understand your kind. Your strength, your courage, it is unlike anything I have encountered. I wish to know more." Elena wasn't sure what to make of this. An alien, here in Willow Creek, wanting to learn about humans? It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel. But there was something about Lyra's demeanor, something gentle, almost vulnerable, that made Elena want to trust her. "All right," Elena said. "But you can't stay here. If anyone else finds you, they might not be as understanding as I am. Come with me. I'll take you somewhere safe." Lyra nodded, and together, they made their way back to Elena's cabin on the edge of town. As they walked, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her life, and the life of everyone in Willow Creek, was about to change forever. Elena's cabin was a modest, two-room structure surrounded by tall pines. It was the perfect place to hide someone, or something, that didn't belong. She led Lyra inside and quickly closed the curtains, ensuring that no prying eyes could see in. Lyra moved with an otherworldly grace, her long limbs folding elegantly as she sat on the floor. Elena offered her a glass of water, which Lyra accepted with a curious expression. She held the glass in her hands, studying it as if it were a rare artifact. "This is water?" Lyra asked. "Yes," Elena replied. "Do you not have water where you come from?" "We do," Lyra said. "But it is different. More alive." Elena wasn't sure what to make of that, but she decided not to press the issue. Instead, she sat down across from Lyra and began to ask the questions that had been burning in her mind since they first met. "What is your world like?" Elena asked. "Why did you come here?" Lyra's eyes grew distant, as if she were recalling a memory from long ago. "My world is beautiful," she said. "But it is also dying. Our sun grows colder with each passing cycle, and our people are struggling to survive. We have sent explorers to many worlds, searching for a new home. But we are not just looking for a place to live, we are looking for hope." "Hope?" Elena echoed. "Yes," Lyra said. "Your kind fascinates us. Despite your fragility, you possess a strength and courage that is rare in the universe. You face challenges that would destroy others, and yet you persevere. We believe that by understanding you, we can learn how to save ourselves." Elena was silent for a moment, processing this. It was a lot to take in: aliens, dying worlds, the fate of humanity being studied like a science experiment. But there was something about Lyra's words that resonated with her. She had always believed in the resilience of the human spirit, and now, here was someone, something, from another world who saw that same quality. "All right," Elena said. "I'll help you. But you have to promise me one thing." "What is that?" Lyra asked. "You can't let anyone else know you're here," Elena said. "If the government finds out, or the military, they'll take you away. They'll dissect you, study you, and I don't want that to happen." Lyra nodded. "I understand. I will be careful." Over the next few days, Elena and Lyra settled into a routine. Elena taught Lyra about human culture, showing her books, music, and films. In return, Lyra shared stories of her own world, describing its towering crystal cities and vast, shimmering oceans. The more time they spent together, the more Elena began to see Lyra not as an alien, but as a friend. But their peaceful existence couldn't last forever. One evening, as Elena was preparing dinner, she heard a knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. No one ever came out this far unless they had a reason. She opened the door to find Deputy Mark Harris, a local law enforcement officer and an old high school acquaintance. Mark was in his early 30s, with a rugged charm and a reputation for being thorough. "Hey, Elena," Mark said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to bother you, but we've had some reports of strange activity out here. Lights in the sky, weird noises, that kind of thing. You haven't seen anything unusual, have you?" Elena forced a smile. "No, nothing unusual. Just the usual wildlife." Mark nodded, but his eyes lingered on the cabin, as if he sensed something was off. "All right. Well, if you do see anything, give us a call, okay?" "Will do," Elena said, closing the door as Mark walked away. She leaned against it, her heart racing. They were getting too close. If they found Lyra, it would be a disaster. She turned to Lyra, who had been hiding in the shadows. "We need to be more careful," Elena said. "If they find you." "I understand," Lyra said. "But there is something you should know. My presence here is not just about learning. There is a reason I came to this place, to this town." Elena frowned. "What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "There is a disturbance. A force that threatens your world, just as it threatens mine. I came here to stop it." Elena's mind raced. A disturbance? A force? What was Lyra talking about? Before she could ask, Lyra continued. "I cannot do this alone. I will need your help, Elena. Together, we can protect both our worlds. Elena took a deep breath. She had no idea what she was getting into, but one thing was clear: her life was about to get a lot more complicated. The next morning, Elena woke to find Lyra standing by the window, her luminous eyes fixed on the horizon. The alien girl had been quiet since their conversation the night before, and Elena could tell that something was weighing heavily on her mind. "What is it?" Elena asked, joining her by the window. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pointed to the sky. "Do you see it?" she asked. Elena squinted, trying to make out what Lyra was referring to. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the usual expanse of blue. But then, she noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air, like heat rising from asphalt on a hot day. "What is that?" Elena asked. "It is a rift," Lyra said. "A tear in the fabric of reality. It is small now, but it will grow. And when it does, it will unleash something terrible." Elena's stomach churned. "What kind of something?" Lyra turned to her, her expression grave. "A being of pure energy, born from the void between worlds. It feeds on fear, on despair. It thrives on chaos. If it enters your world, it will consume everything in its path." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "How do we stop it?" "We must close the rift," Lyra said. "But to do that, we will need to find the source of its power. It is hidden somewhere in this town, guarded by those who serve it." Elena's mind raced. A hidden source of power? Servants of an otherworldly being? It sounded like something out of a nightmare. But she knew she couldn't ignore it. If what Lyra said was true, then the entire town, maybe even the entire world, was in danger. "All right," Elena said. "Where do we start?" Lyra closed her eyes, as if listening to something only she could hear. "There is a place," she said. "A place of darkness. It is where the rift began. We must go there." Elena didn't like the sound of that, but she knew she didn't have a choice. She grabbed her jacket and followed Lyra out the door. The two of them made their way through the forest, following a path that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The trees grew denser, the air colder, until they reached a clearing that felt wrong. The ground was blackened, as if scorched by an invisible fire, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, covered in strange, glowing symbols. Surrounding it were figures cloaked in shadows, their faces obscured. They chanted in a language that made Elena's skin crawl, their voices rising and falling in a discordant rhythm. Lyra stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. The figures turned to her, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You do not belong here," one of them hissed. "Leave, or face the consequences." Lyra's voice was calm but firm. "I will not leave. This ends now." The figures lunged at her, their movements unnaturally fast. But Lyra was faster. She raised her hand, and a burst of light erupted from her palm, sending the figures flying. Elena watched in awe as Lyra moved with a grace and power that was almost otherworldly. But the figures were not so easily defeated. They rose to their feet, their forms shifting and twisting until they were no longer human. They became shadows, writhing and pulsating, their eyes burning with malice. Elena felt a surge of panic. She had no idea how to fight something like this. But then, she remembered Lyra's words, "Your strength, your courage, it is unlike anything I have encountered." She took a deep breath and stepped forward, standing beside Lyra. "I'm with you," she said. Lyra nodded, and together, they faced the shadows. The battle was fierce, but in the end, they emerged victorious. The figures dissolved into nothingness, and the altar crumbled to dust. But as the clearing grew quiet, Elena noticed something. The rift in the sky was still there, faint but persistent. "It's not over, is it?" she asked. Lyra shook her head. No. This was only the beginning. The rift is stronger than I anticipated. We will need to find another way to close it. Elena felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had no idea what they were up against, but one thing was clear: the fight was far from over. As the days passed, Elena and Lyra worked tirelessly to uncover the secrets of the rift. They scoured the town for clues, piecing together fragments of information from old legends and local folklore. It was slow, painstaking work, but they were determined. One evening, as they were poring over a stack of ancient texts in Elena's cabin, there was a knock at the door. Elena tensed. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door to find Dr. James Carter, a historian and professor at the local university. James was in his mid-40s, with a sharp mind and a passion for the unknown. He had been a mentor to Elena during her college years, and she trusted him implicitly. "James," Elena said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" James smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "I heard you've been asking questions about the town's history. I thought I might be able to help." Elena hesitated. She wanted to trust James, but she wasn't sure how much she could tell him. Before she could respond, Lyra stepped into view. James's eyes widened in shock. What is that?" Elena sighed. There was no point in hiding it now. "James, this is Lyra. She's not from around here." James stared at Lyra, his mind clearly racing. But to his credit, he didn't panic. Instead, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "All right," he said. "Start from the beginning." Elena and Lyra spent the next hour explaining everything: the rift, the shadows, the threat to both their worlds. James listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When they were finished, he leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "This is incredible," he said. "But it also explains a lot. There have been stories about this town for centuries, legends of a dark force that lurks in the shadows. I always thought they were just myths, but now you know they're real," Elena said. James nodded. "And if what you're saying is true, then we need to act fast. The rift is growing, and if we don't stop it, it could destroy everything." Elena felt a surge of hope. With James's knowledge and expertise, they might stand a chance. "Do you have any idea how we can close it?" she asked. James frowned. "There's an old legend about a sacred artifact, a relic said to have the power to seal rifts between worlds. It's called the Eclipse Stone. According to the stories, it was hidden somewhere in this town centuries ago, but no one knows where." Lyra's eyes lit up. "The Eclipse Stone. I have heard of it. If we can find it, we may be able to close the rift." Elena felt a renewed sense of determination. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll find the Eclipse Stone and stop this thing once and for all." Over the next few days, the three of them worked together, following every lead and clue they could find. They discovered that the Eclipse Stone had been hidden in a secret chamber beneath the town's oldest church. But getting to it wouldn't be easy. The church was heavily guarded, and the shadows were growing stronger. As they prepared for their final mission, Elena couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. They were up against something far beyond their understanding, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But she also knew that they couldn't give up. Too much was at stake. "Are you ready?" Lyra asked, her voice calm but resolute. Elena took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." With that, they set off into the night, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The church loomed before them, its ancient stone walls casting long shadows in the moonlight. The air was thick with tension as Elena, Lyra, and James approached the entrance. They knew that the shadows would be waiting for them, but they had no choice. The Eclipse Stone was their only hope. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding. The shadows were everywhere, their forms shifting and writhing in the darkness. But this time, Elena was ready. She had faced them before, and she knew what to expect. Lyra took the lead, her luminous eyes scanning the room. "The stone is here," she said. "I can feel it." They moved quickly, following Lyra's instincts as she led them deeper into the church. The shadows closed in around them, but Lyra's light kept them at bay. Elena and James stayed close, their hearts pounding as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Finally, they reached a hidden chamber beneath the church. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of black stone, was the eclipse stone. It was a small, unassuming object, but it radiated a powerful energy that filled the room. "That's it," James said, his voice filled with awe. "The eclipse stone." But before they could reach it, the shadows attacked. They came from all sides, their forms twisting and contorting as they lunged at the group. Lyra raised her hand, and a burst of light erupted from her palm, driving the shadows back. But there were too many of them, and they were relentless. Elena grabbed the stone, feeling its energy surge through her. "What do I do?" she shouted. "Focus your thoughts." Lyra replied. "Channel the stone's power and close the rift." Elena closed her eyes, concentrating with all her might. She thought of everything she had been through, the fear, the doubt, the courage it had taken to get this far. She thought of Lyra, of James, of the town she had grown up in. And she thought of the future, of the world she wanted to protect. The stone began to glow, its light growing brighter and brighter until it filled the room. The shadows screamed, their forms dissolving as the light consumed them. Outside, the rift in the sky began to shrink, its edges folding in on themselves until it was gone. When the light finally faded, the chamber was silent. The shadows were gone, and the rift was closed. Elena opened her eyes, her heart racing. "Did it work?" she asked. Lyra smiled. "Yes. The rift is closed." "You did it, Elena." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had done it. They had saved the town, maybe even the world. But as they made their way back to the surface, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The shadows were gone, but there were other threats out there, other rifts, other worlds. And she knew that, one day, they might have to face them. For now, though, she was content to rest. They had won this battle, and that was enough. As they stepped out into the moonlight, Elena turned to Lyra. "What happens now?" she asked. Lyra looked at her, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Now, we rebuild. And we prepare. The universe is vast, Elena. There is much more to discover." Elena smiled. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she was ready for whatever came next.